A new report is shedding light on how national business leaders and local residents perceive Detroit's revitalization. The 2019 Detroit Reinvestment Index was produced by Detroit Future City, a nonprofit that works to improve the quality of life for Detroiters. Here are some of the highlights from the survey. 46% of national business leaders see Detroit as an excellent business opportunity, and many of them would invest in the city. However, there are still some misconceptions about Detroit's financial situation. 21% of the business leaders thought the city was still in bankruptcy, and 34% thought it was emerging from Chapter 9. Turning to the perceptions of residents, 46% of Detroiters have a more favorable impression of the city today than they did before, while 63% of suburbanites share that same opinion. Joining me now is the Executive Director of Detroit Future City, Anika Goss. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me,
So those are really interesting numbers, and there's not a lot of bad news in them.
Right.
The misconception about bankruptcy is something that I actually hear from people when I talk to them in other cities. They're like, how's that bankruptcy going? And I'm like, well, we're 5 years past that, but
Right.
that's okay, right?
I think we thought that was really interesting also.
Yeah.
I think we really thought of it as, in Detroit, we move past things once we've resolved them, right? Like, okay, that was over.
We did it.
We're not going to talk about it anymore.
Right.
We're looking towards the future.
Yeah.
And I think the rest of the country is really expected us to talk about what's happening post-bankruptcy.
Yeah.
What do we look like now, and expecting for us to still talk about it.
Yeah. The perception that people have of the city, of course, is important from a business perspective, people from outside the city. Talk about these business leaders who say, look, this is a great time to invest in Detroit. That's not something we've heard a whole lot over the most recent history, I guess.
Well, and this year, and so this is the fourth year of the Reinvestment Index, and the Kresge Foundation sponsored the report and had been actually commissioning the survey earlier. And we found a 14% increase in national business leaders and how they feel about Detroit over last year.
Yeah.
So we are really seeing that trend, and I think that's something we should really be looking out for, that we should be promoting and really using to our advantage right now.
Yeah, I mean, we still have a lot of barriers to the kinds of investment that you see in other cities, and I hear still from people in other cities, they're like, yeah, if I were to do that in Detroit, it wouldn't work as well. But the idea that it's getting better, I think, is important. And I think, success kind of builds on success. Like, we're starting to see things work in Detroit that didn't work before.
Well, I think that I completely agree with that. I think one of the most interesting data points that came out of the report was that the national business leaders felt like, when asked whether they would prefer a city that was more expensive but had more amenities for their employees, or whether they would prefer a city that was less expensive but had fewer amenities for their employees, it was almost 50-50. It was like 43-52 or something like that. So we were really surprised by that, but I think it also speaks to where Detroit is right now, that it's really still seen as a city of opportunity.
Yeah. Let's talk about residents and our perceptions of the city. We've got not only a strong opinion of ourselves, but our suburban neighbors who we've always had a kind of tenuous relationship with, strained at some times. It seems like they're a little more bullish on our chances.
I know, that was pretty cool, right?
I thought that was
They're
surprising.
still a little hesitant about moving.
Right.
And that came out in the survey as well. They aren't quite ready to move, but they were really excited about what's happening and the changes that are happening. I think what was really surprising for us was that we expected for Detroiters to say, hey, we're really excited about the new investment that's happening here, or we're not so excited because we haven't seen any of the investment in my neighborhood specifically. That we expected. I think what we didn't expect was the evenness between Detroiters and suburbanites, both really thinking positively about new investment in their neighborhoods, but also asking some of the same questions as to whether these were the right businesses that were paying the right wage and and offering the kinds of services they need, both in Detroit and in their own neighborhoods in the suburbs.
Yeah. one of the things I think is interesting about your work is taking data like this and translating it to, the way it impacts Detroiters, the
Right.
way it impacts the people who live here, and especially those people who are being left behind some of the things that we're seeing happen. Tell us how these two things
Right.
kind of relate.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we understood and tried to make really, really clear in the report was the impact of redevelopment on renters. We really believe that at Detroit Future City, that renters are the most vulnerable population,
Yes.
whether you're a low income renter or a moderate, middle income renter or a higher income renter, you are vulnerable to redevelopment change.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that's stable about that. And now that Detroit is a majority renter city, it becomes even more tenuous.
That's right.
And so what we were surprised about is because there's so much talk on social media about gentrification and displacement, but in fact, when asked in this consumer survey, there was actually very few people who had actually been displaced.
Yeah.
But there were a lot more people that were fearful of being displaced.
Yeah.
And if you were a renter, 48% of the renters that we talked to, both in Detroit and then like 28% in the suburbs, were all really concerned about potential displacement and fearful of being displaced.
Yeah.
I think that's something to really, really pay attention to. I'm hoping that investors and city officials will really consider that as they're thinking about new investment, that how we secure the renter population in Detroit has to be as important as the kind of investment that goes into the city.
Yeah, and I also, I wonder how much we should be focused on trying to create more owners in
Yeah.
Detroit as well, right? I mean, especially at the lower income level, where people are not choosing to rent but are unable to buy. This was the sort of cradle of single-family home ownership,
That's right.
especially among African Americans.
That's
for
right.
such a long time. We should be trying to reclaim some of that.
That's exactly right, Stephen. And it wasn't included in this report, but the loss of wealth of African American homeowners
Right.
is really significant, highest than it's ever been. And so that's a really important point, that the home ownership system right now isn't stable enough to actually create an environment
Right.
for as many homeowners as lost the opportunity over the past 10 years.
Yeah.
And so having to make an intentional effort around stabilizing that system, creating more opportunities for homeowners, that's really going to make the difference.
Yeah, and it's not just about investment, outside investment or local investment. It's about directing those investments to the things that'll
Yeah.
make a difference. And I feel like sometimes we're not really clear about what all those things are.
Right. I do think that sometimes we end up really wanting to focus on what's new and shiny and exciting and
right.
outside. And I think what this report also showed was that there are a lot of really strong assets that are here, that people are excited about, and that they want us to begin to pay attention to. Yeah.
All right. Well, congratulations on the work.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Always great to see you.